If you teach at a Christian school, you've heard the term biblical integration, but you might be wondering, how exactly do I actually do that? Well, that's what we're going to dive into today. Welcome back to the Teach for the Heart podcast, where we tackle teaching challenges from a biblical perspective. Why are we here? Because we don't believe that our spiritual walk and teaching profession should exist in two separate domains. Rather, the hope we have in Christ should change how we approach everything, not just at home, but at school as well. So join us as we explore both the spiritual and practical sides of key teaching challenges, integrating them together so we can succeed at teaching, glorify God, and make a lasting difference in our students' hearts and lives. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. We also want to thank our sponsor, Graceland University. Graceland University prepares educators to lead with purpose by combining academic excellence with a biblical worldview. Their specialty is in helping amazing paraprofessionals earn their teaching degree in a unique way that is, first of all, affordable, and secondly, works with their school schedule and responsibilities. Find out more at graceland.edu. Well, today we are talking about how do we actually do biblical integration, or how do we actually teach our students to think from a biblical worldview. And I'm joined today by Amanda Reed, one of our Teach for the Heart team members and one of our Teach for the Heart Plus mentors. Amanda, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And if you recall, if you listen to our other episode with Amanda, you'll recall Amanda has amazing experience both on the teaching side and the admin side. So she's going to have such a great perspective to be with us today. Well, as we were talking about this topic and how, particularly in Christian schools, a lot of times teachers are told, hey, you need to do biblical integration. You need to integrate the Bible into what you're teaching. And that can, first of all, be, especially if you're coming from a public school background, be very just different than what you're used to. But we were talking a little bit about, let's start with the why. Why is this worth our time? Because sometimes there's this argument. Amanda, tell me sometimes the argument that you hear when in teachers you worked with, it's almost like against doing this. What is that argument that you've heard from time to time?
Yeah, and unfortunately, there can sometimes be this mindset that education should be separate from Christianity, because we don't want to mix those things, because at school they should be focused on reading and writing and math and, history and science. That's all that they should do. And we shouldn't be taking away from that by going over Bible verses or singing prayers or taking time in our day to have a discussion about the Bible or God. But in reality, when you truly do have a biblical worldview and biblical integration in your class, it's really intertwined, and all that really enhances those subjects when it's done correctly. So that's why we should do it, is because it can truly make all those subjects better and come to life even more than when we just keep it completely separate.
Right. And there is this idea, Nancy Percy talks about this actually, this idea of a sacred secular split, where it's like religion belongs over here and the rest of life belongs over here. And that is a common view in our world, but that is not a Christian view. When you look at scripture, God definitely does not view life that way. It's not, okay, I have my religion for my personal life and for church, and then, I function the rest of the week without God, right? So that's not how it should be in our classroom either. And like I said, if you came from a public school, that's tricky, because that is what you're told. You can't bring this in here, which we're going to talk about in a second. But the reality is that, particularly in a Christian school, you are allowed to. And so you absolutely should, because everything we learn about, it's God's world. He made it. He is involved in it. His fingerprints are on everything. So honestly, if we don't bring him into it, we are missing a big part of the picture. And so, as you said, we're not saying, hey, take time away from math, take time away from history to teach the Bible. No, we're saying bring the truth of what is already true in your subject to light. And we'll kind of get into some of the specifics about that.
Yeah, it's like bringing the creator of it all into that subject. Like, if we're going to go on a topic of of like a specific book, right? And you're talking about this book to your friend. Well, if you bring the author of that book, you're going to get a whole lot better perspective of that book. And the conversation is going to be, fantastic, as opposed if it's just you, right? So whenever we bring the creator of all of those subjects, the creator of the world, the creator of order into your teaching, it's going to make all that make so much more sense and just come alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other aspect we were talking about ahead of time was also how um, biblical integration is not just about what we say, it's also about
Mhm.
what we do, right? So it's
Yeah.
also about how we live out what we believe and what the Bible teaches in our actions. And this is even an area where, even if you teach in a public school where they say you can't really, you have to be careful what
Mhm.
you say. What you do should absolutely
Yeah.
be impacted by your worldview. And honestly, I'll say this too, in a public school and a Christian school, what you say absolutely should be impacted in a public school by your worldview as well. Now, there's a line you can't cross. You're not allowed to proselytize, but does that mean that what you say isn't from your perspective on what you know to be true? No, it should
Mhm.
actually also be very much influenced, and your worldview should totally be leaking out, even
Yeah.
in a public school, because all of us have a worldview and we do bring it. It's just about recognizing, no, this is true. And yes, the truth should come out. And obviously, once again, public schools, there's rules about how you have to stop at a certain
Yeah.
point legally. But in a Christian school, you don't. You can go all the way there, and you can teach it all.
Yeah. Oftentimes, whenever I would I would talk with some new teachers about how they would integrate the Bible or bring in their worldview. They just they separate those, and it's like, oh, I'll pray at the beginning of the day. We can pray at lunchtime. If a student asks me about Jesus and how to be saved, I'll walk them through the sinner's prayer. But there's so much more to that. It's living out that Christian life. There's this saying that goes, preach the gospel, and when necessary, use words, because your actions have so much more value than just the words that you say. And students are smart. Students catch on to things. And if you are saying one thing but then always doing another, they're not going to start believing you with other things that you say. They're just, it's going to go in one ear and right out the other. So your actions have more power in your classroom than what your words do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that phrase is such an interesting phrase, because I do believe the word is very necessary if we're going to
Yeah.
actually preach the
Yeah.
gospel. But the point of that, I think the beneficial point of that phrase is our actions are very powerful,
Yeah.
and we should never underestimate that. And if what we're saying and what we're doing don't match, that's a very, very big problem.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that opportunity to live out our faith in our day-to-day interactions is so key, so key.
Yeah. Definitely not discrediting how you have to use your words to spread the gospel.
That's a whole other discussion, but I love that.
Yeah.
That's so helpful. So, as we're kind of getting into this, that was some of the why and hopefully painting a little bit of a vision, but we want to kind of get into some of the practicals. So, if you said,
Mhm.
okay, I get it, or I've already, I want to do this, I'm being asked to do this. How do I actually do it? What we're going to do is Amanda is first of all going to share some of how when she was working with teachers, like a place where she would start. And then I'm going to share a kind of a different method, because there's no one way to do this. There's so many different
Mhm.
ways that you can do it. And so we'll kind of share a few different examples of ways that you can approach this, particularly if you don't know where to start, but also if you're already doing it and just saying, how can I do it more? These are two additional ways that you can bring
Mhm.
Bible and biblical worldview into your classroom.
Yeah, so there's two different starting points that you can work with. You can start with, okay, I'm creating my plan for the beginning of the school year. Where do I start? And then I've already made my classroom management plan, and I'm seeing some issues with my class. How can I start to make changes? So because school years have started, I'll start with that second one. The school year has started, and some behaviors are coming up, or some things just aren't going the way that you would like. I would I would ask my staff, okay, what is one area that you would like to see changed in your classroom? Is it students complaining? Is it students not just rushing through things or not doing their best? Is it students fighting? Is it not listening to directions? Um, and let's say that it's students always complaining about things, because even as adults and teachers, we are some of the worst with complaining. Whenever a class ends, what's the first thing we do? We go to our neighbor teacher and we say all the bad things that happened that day, right? Um, but whenever students are complaining too much, you can start to bring into your classroom every day the verse that talks about do everything without complaining or grumbling. Before every lesson, put that up on the board, say it, read it together, pray it. And whenever the students start to really not want to write out all their vocab words, or they see this paper for math, or you tell them we're going to work on a narrative today, and they start complaining about all these things. Just really reiterating, do everything without complaining or grumbling. And that also has to apply to you as a teacher. You have to then do everything without complaining or grumbling. If you get that phone call from, the front office when you're in the middle of a lesson and you're like, oh, and you walk over to it and you answer the phone, you hang up the phone and you kind of sigh as you walk off again. Well, that's a form of complaining and grumbling, right? The students just saw that. If the student tells you, Mrs. Reed, I didn't do my homework today, you can't be like, again, really, this is how many times this week or this month. Well, that was just complaining, right? Whenever a student messes up or a student does something they shouldn't do, we can't complain and we can't grumble, because that takes away all the credit that you have. So just choosing one or two verses to really build that foundation of your classroom on. Don't choose all these areas. Start with one. My students are complaining too much. Well, that is Philippians 2:14, right? Or if students they're not trying that hard on their work, they're turning in papers that they can do better. Well, Colossians 3:23 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as for the Lord and not for man." And you can take that verse and you can apply it to when they're walking in the hallway, when they're playing at recess, when they're eating lunch, when they're in science or math or social studies. You can then integrate all those into your subjects and into your discipline plans and your classroom management plan.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that power of repetition, you might feel like, well, I'm just saying the same thing over and over again. That's really powerful. That's something that, you say it once or twice, students may or may not remember it. You say it, repeatedly over a month or two. That's something that's going to stick with students. They're going to remember, Mrs. Reed always said this when I was in her class, they'll remember that. And it also is opportunity to go deeper, right? Sometimes you're just pointing to the verse. Sometimes you might have a conversation. You might have a conversation. Why? What is this? Why does God say this? So there's so much you can do with that. And I love that thought that I think when we think biblical integration, a lot of times we go straight to the subject. Okay, I need something that has to do with, the fall of Rome or, solving equations. And yes, I mean that we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but it doesn't have to just be your actual content area. There's so much happening in your class. Yeah. All those interactions are ripe with opportunities to bring in scripture and scriptural truths. That's great.
Yeah. And I think that before students will really appreciate and grasp the concept of the biblical integration to specific subjects and specific lessons, they need to really appreciate building your class, the foundation of your classroom on biblical truths. And once you start to do that, and then you can start to pull in specific examples and specific verses into, your math lesson with estimating or elapsed time, or you're working on a timeline in social studies. Because if you're trying to force scriptural references into those, it's just kind of like, okay, here we go again. Like, it doesn't really mean anything. But whenever they start to see the fruit of applying the, blessed are the peacemakers, do everything without grumbling, whatever is praiseworthy, focus on those things. Whenever they start to see the fruit of all those in your classroom, then they can start to appreciate bringing in the scriptural references into each specific subject.
Yeah, right. Because, all scripture is God breathed and valuable, but what we don't want to do is just be like picking verses randomly because they kind of seem like maybe they fit and we're just completely taking them out of context and just throwing that's, I don't know if I don't know if I would do harm, but it's not going to do a lot of good. No. So that's not really where we want to focus our efforts. So I love that, talking about just using them in your classroom and in how you interact and teach and in your classroom management. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. And I have to tell you, I just went to a Herzog event last week, and it was just amazing to see how much God is doing in education at large, but specifically at the Herzog Foundation. They are really pouring into particularly Christian schools in an incredible way. And if you're teaching at a Christian school, you should definitely be checking them out. In particular, take a look at their amazing lineup of free trainings. I mean, even lodging and meals are included for free. So you definitely don't want to miss that. Another resource that everyone can enjoy no matter where you teach is their Faith and Freedom 250 video series, which tells stories of faith, sacrifice, and courage from America's history. So please check out these and so many more resources at herzogfoundation.com. That's herzogfoundation.com. Now back to our conversation. I'm going to talk next about kind of a framework that we can use to bring scriptural truths into a lot of things. Actually, this would apply to interpersonal class relationships, like we were talking about, just classroom issues. This would apply to subject areas, and also definitely applies to current events, which I know the older you get, that just comes up and people are talking about what's happening, or you want to bring up something that's happening in the world. So it's this recognition of, in the Bible, it's one big story, and there's kind of 4 acts. There's creation, the fall, redemption at the cross, and restoration in heaven one day. And if you kind of keep these 4 big points in mind, there are so many things you can tie in from these 4 into so many different things. So I'm just going to go through them one at a time and give some examples. So first of all, creation. Okay, the fact that God is creator might seem like, oh yeah, we all know God is the creator. This has so many implications. And it's something where if your students really get that down in their hearts, it will impact them forever. So we can bring this up all the time. And once again, the repetition is powerful here. Don't be like, I already said that. But I mean, this should come out all the time. If you are a science teacher, the fact that God created this should come out all the time. And once you're not taking like 20 minutes out of your lesson to be like, and God made this, it should just exude out of you, right? And look at this plant and look at the complexity that God put here, and we're studying the human body and the healing. Look how God made our bodies to heal, and look at this and look at that. And like, this shows his creativity and this shows his power. And this should just be part of what you do. Yeah. Just that creation aspect. It has implications on who we are, and we're created in God's image. I mean, there's implications everywhere. Just talking about how, yes, this is because we are created by God. Mm-hmm. So that's the first one, is creation. The second one is the fall. And this is just the part of the story where man sinned, and because of that, the world is broken. So this, once again, has so many implications, right? You're talking about history. Why are countries at war? Well, it's because of the fall. It is because of sin, selfishness, brokenness. It all traces back to the fall. Why do these horrible things happen? We record these episodes ahead of time, and Charlie Kirk just passed this week as we're doing it. Why does this happen? Right? We just had a school shooting 2 weeks ago. Why do these things happen when they come up? It's because of the fall. It's because of the brokenness in the world. And there's just, why do we have interpersonal issues, and why is it so hard to get along? It's because this world is broken because of the fall. And like I said, the more you repeat that, the more that, if that, once again, another core truth, if that sinks down, students understanding the world is broken because of the fall. The world is broken because of sin. It's a powerful truth to sink down, and you can bring it up all the time, very naturally, very quickly. These are not like 20-minute sermons. These are 30-second little things that you drop in that are really powerful. So that's creation, then the fall. The third is redemption. The idea that God sent his son into the world to die for us on the cross to redeem us from this brokenness. And this one, the first 2 come up really a lot in just a lot of subjects and just content material. But this one is really interesting how you can bring it in. And there's so much more beyond what I'm even saying, but a few examples of where you can bring this in. Sometimes there's opportunities where you actually see it, right? You might be actually talking about something where Jesus is specifically involved, but there's also a lot of opportunities to talk about how someone needs Jesus, and they might not even see it. So you're in literature and you're reading a story, and you might talk about how did the character respond to this? Okay, but they don't know the Lord. How might it have changed them if they would have known, if they would have had Jesus in their life? How would this have changed their response, right? That could be a very rich conversation. That's, once again, back to our point of this enriching it. That's a good literary discussion to have, in addition to being a good biblical discussions. We're marrying all this together, and there's just so many opportunities to point out, well, that's why we need Jesus. That's why Jesus came.
Absolutely.
Obviously in the spiritual realm, but also recognizing it impacts everything. And then the final kind of high point on this story is restoration. In other words, that idea that this is not the end. We're still in the middle of the story. One day God will make everything right. And this is another thing that's just so powerful to just, if you get this in your heart and let it exude out from time to time, when we're talking about those wars, one day God will end all war. One day God will end the injustice. God is the just judge, and he will judge, and he will make everything right. And this brokenness will be gone. Just kind of hitting that high point real quick in history, even in science, right? The world is deteriorating, but one day it won't be like this. Just kind of painting that picture of what God will do one day. It has so many tie-ins. So you can see I'm getting a little bit excited, but I think that's good though. Like if you kind of get this and get, oh my goodness, this applies to everything. And you have just those moments where you let it spill out with that excitement and that passion that's very powerful. And adding those up over the course of a year can really have a huge impact on how students see the world and how they make these connections where God is involved. He's not up there absent, just sitting up there, hoping we do the right thing. He's involved, he's active, and it's all his story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I love that, how you can take those four main ideas and you can really put them into every single subject and every lesson that you're doing. I love that.
Yeah, so much you can do with that. So there's obviously so much more we could say, but we don't want this episode to be an hour long. So Amanda, any kind of final thoughts or recommendations for teachers before we wrap up?
Yeah. So I would say, keep it simple, like Linda's thing, the creation, fall, redemption, restoration. You shouldn't have to force anything, because whenever you force things, it loses its validity. So just another example, like if you have to get a biblical integration for like the Roaring 20s, or for diagramming a sentence, you can look at big picture. Well, in the Bible that that God wrote, he didn't physically write it, but he references past events. He references timelines. He references people in our past. And so because God did that, we're going to practice that as well. We're going to look back in history, and we're going to learn about the history, so who's ever heard of the Hindenburg, and you can take big picture ideas, not just specific scriptures, but big picture ideas from the Bible, and apply that as well into your worldview.
Yeah, that's a great tip as well. Yeah. And just recognizing, right, you're not always just hunting, what does God have to do with like terms in algebra class?
Yeah.
You're going to just like go drive crazy, but remembering it's more than just that. Yeah. It's more than just my subject area. It's what's happening in my class, what's happening in the world. There's a lot that you can bring in if you are required to have like something in your lesson plan, for each thing or something like that. And then also remember, this is something you could talk to your administrator about. If you're like, I'm really struggling with this aspect, they're telling me to do this or this or this, and I'm like, this feels like I'm forcing it. It feels wonky. Go to them and just explain that this is what I'm feeling. How would you handle that? And kind of have that discussion, and that will help you get some insights, flesh it out, and maybe some fresh ideas, or maybe even a change in the expectation if it is kind of doesn't make sense. So well, Amanda, thank you so much for bringing your ideas, and I hope that you guys found this helpful. One other resource I want to mention before we go, if you haven't listened to episode 349 of the podcast, in that we had a couple people from Summit Ministries. They've actually developed biblical worldview standards, which is very interesting. It's kind of a way of looking at, hey, in each grade, what are some concepts that are really good to bring up at that age? So just like I kind of went through creation, fall, redemption, restoration, if this is something that you're like, I've been doing this for a while and I actually kind of have some of these basics down and I want more ideas, or if you're just like, hey, I need more ideas of where to start, those standards I think would just be really helpful for you to just kind of read through and just say, oh, okay, I think it'll just open up a lot of ideas for you. So you can check those out at teachfortheheart.com/349 is the episode where we link to those, or you can scroll back in your feed and find episode 349. Well, thank you guys so much for being with us. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. All views and opinions are our own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Herzog Foundation. If you did enjoy this episode, like, subscribe, share, leave a review, do all the things that really does help it spread the word and reach more people. Well, thank you for being with us. We look forward to speaking with you again soon. In the meantime, teacher, remember, God is at work in you and through you, and he's using you to make a difference. Keep your eyes on him and teach for the heart.